support publishing and media behind the scenes. I'm Valerie Lovelace, and I will be your host today. And with me, I have Rebekah Pitts. She is the author of 250 Fascinating Facts About LDS Temples and 250 Fascinating Facts About Latter-day Saints. Welcome, Rebekah.
Thank you.
And it's nice to have you back. This is your second time on our podcast. First time we talked about your really fun book, The LDS Facts, and this time we're going to really delve into the temple facts, and these are equally as fascinating, I think.
I think so.
Yeah. Who knew there were so many facts about temples, especially now that we have how many temples? Do you know?
We have a lot of temples.
Is that the exact number?
The exact number of temples is currently a lot.
Yeah, really.
The exact number of temples, there's two different pieces of information for how many temples. There's how many temples are completed and how many temples are announced. So I think right now we have, well, I won't say right now, last October, because I haven't checked to see if any more have been dedicated, 166 operating and 51 announced as of last October. So that adds up to 217.
I think that's just how it's gonna be from now on. It's just always going to be a changing number.
Yeah.
So we're just gonna keep building and building and building, which is really cool. So let's start with Angel Moroni. You have a fact about how tall the tallest Angel Moroni is, but it wasn't so cut and dry to figure that out, was it?
No, it wasn't. So you would think that finding out how tall the tallest, the shortest, the longest of anything would be easy to find, because that's a fact, right? Hard evidence. But as I was researching this, I realized that it wasn't really a clear-cut answer. And first I was researching and I was typing on my computer, and I had targeted a certain temple as having the tallest Angel Moroni. And I came to realize that maybe I wasn't right as I researched more and I started to find some different answers. And I was thinking about how when my children will stand on a chair and say, "Mom, I'm taller than you," that maybe we had some funny math going on. I was able to get into contact with a man named Brian Olson, and he is an Angel Moroni expert, and he's just obsessed with the Angel Moroni and with the temples. He actually makes 3D models of every temple, both a virtual model, and you can also have them printed. And he helped me a lot with my Angel Moroni facts to make sure that everything was really accurate. And he pointed out to me that the reason that the Jordan River Temple, Angel Moroni, was being touted as the tallest was because of its base.
Oh.
So it wasn't.
Does it have a different base on it than the rest?
They all have different things. You know, some of them are on the Angel Moroni on the Salt Lake Temple is on a ball. Some are on a square base, different sizes of bases. And so this was being measured from the bottom of the base, which is just like a kid standing on a chair and saying, "I'm taller than you." So when I found that out, I decided that I was going to take the measurement from the bottom of the feet to the top of the head, which I think is what's actually correct. And when you do that, the Washington, D.C. temple has the tallest Angel Moroni statue, and it is 18 feet tall.
Wow.
And I was really excited about Jordan River, like really excited, and I was telling people because that's my temple. And this was a little bit of a consolation prize for me because Washington, D.C. was my temple for 3 years when we lived back there, so I was still happy.
Okay, so Washington, D.C. has the tallest man of the statue. But so with Jordan River, though, with the base included, that one is actually bigger?
Yes.
So is the base like really, really huge on that one or something?
It is big. I mean, several feet. When you're down on the ground and you look up, they don't look very big.
Yeah.
But 18 feet, that's 3 times taller than a 6-foot man.
Yeah.
So it is really tall.
The Washington, D.C. temple is pretty big, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like one of the full-size temples.
It's the tallest temple, too.
Oh, yeah. And then Jordan River Temple just doesn't seem that big to me to have like one of the biggest.
It's a lot bigger than you
Moronis.
realize.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? That's where that was my first temple session was there.
Very
So
cool.
I love that temple as well. That's so interesting to me. And one thing I didn't realize either is that they're all different. They're like designed differently by different designers.
Right.
They look different. They even have different clothes and facial features and stuff.
Right.
They're totally different. Do you know, are any of them the same? Like designed by the same person and basically the same?
Yes, there's, don't quote me on this, but I think there were about 8 different designers of Angel Moroni statues. And so many of them are identical.
And maybe more now that we have so many brand new temples too. Huh?
Right, that's possible. Many of them are identical, but some of them might be the same statue but made in a different size even.
And then I don't want to overstep another fact to go over later, but they're also all made out of different stuff too.
Right.
So let's see. The Salt Lake Temple you said was copper or bronze.
Copper and then coated with gold.
Oh, copper with gold.
Yeah.
And then a lot of them are fiberglass.
Yeah, so the newer ones are fiberglass, which makes sense for modern technology, that it's lighter weight. Mm-hmm. I always think of fiberglass as really lightweight, but they actually still weigh more than, your typical person. Mm-hmm. 350 pounds maybe for a man-sized statue, and then really thinly coated in gold. But those beginning Angel Moroni statues weighed thousands of pounds.
Yeah. Well, I would think with like the modern way to build a building, we don't build them out of big stones and stuff anymore. They're built out of modern materials.
Right.
And so you probably couldn't put one of those on top of a building unless you like seriously put some engineering.
Yeah, and there is special engineering for the Salt Lake Temple's Angel Moroni, which is the heaviest one. It has a counterbalance that goes down and has to weigh the same, which is, I think it's 4,000 pounds.
How does the counterbalance work? Do you know?
Think of it like a baby's rattle that you've got
Okay, so it's attached to it, and does it just like hang there?
It hangs below it, so a 2-sided rattle that shakes on both sides. The statue on top, and then hanging down below it in the top of the building is a counterweight, so that the statue isn't going to, I guess, blow over basically.
And not top heavy too.
Mm-hmm, not top heavy, yeah.
Okay, cool. That's so interesting. You just wouldn't think that they would have to put that much thought into a statue. Well, because they don't look that big. They really don't.
No, they don't.
But I've seen them when they lower. I've seen a couple pictures where they're like on a crane and they're kind of dangling down by the ground. And you can see how big they really are, and it's crazy.
Yeah, and you can go see one in the Church History Museum on.
Oh, is there one there?
Just off of Temple Square, they have one there, and you realize when you see it then that it's really large, but it just looks like a person from the ground. You think that's a person-sized person, but it's not.
Yeah, and they're actually like removable because they have to take them down and replate them all the time, or not plate them, but what do you call that? They do the gold leafing.
Yeah,
so
they
relief
do.
it, I guess you'd say.
I think about every 15 years.
And even the fiberglass ones have gold leaf on them too, don't they?
Yes, they do.
Which is interesting. Except for, you said there was one that was white for a while.
Yeah, the Monticello Temple was white, and that was because President Hinckley had this idea to have some temples with white statues on them. He thought it would be nice. And they put it on that one first, which is one of the really small temples. And it just didn't really stick out at all. Mm-hmm. It's cloudy down there a lot, and you just couldn't see it. So pretty quickly, they took it down, and they coated it with gold, and they changed their mind about making any more white statues.
Yeah, that could have been cool, but then when you think about it, if there's a cloud in the sky, it's just going to kind of disappear in with the cloud. Okay. Let's move on to Brigham Young taught that there was a temple in the city of Enoch, and that now it's in heaven, right?
Yeah. So if you remember, from the scriptures, the city of Enoch was a city of people who were really righteous, and they were so righteous that their city was taken up. There was a BYU Studies article by David J. Larson, and he said, Moses 7:69 states, "And Enoch and all of his people walked with God, and he dwelt in the midst of Zion. And it came to pass that Zion was not, for God received it up into his own bosom. And from thence went forth the saying, Zion is fled. Because we are informed that God came and dwelled in Zion, it is probably safe to assume that Enoch's city had a temple. This was the belief of Brigham Young, who stated, "I will not say but what Enoch had temples and officiated therein, but we have no account of it." So basically, there's no solid proof of this because none of us have ever actually been to the city of Enoch. That came back to talk about it. But just like the logic dictates that there's an existence of a heavenly mother, logic also dictates that if the city of Enoch was taken up to heaven and God himself visited there, that they would have the house of God in that city.
Yeah, or maybe several.
Probably several. Since they're so righteous,
right.
They probably have
They needed a
bunch.
lot of them. Yeah. That's so interesting. And then also that, does this have to do with the same fact that somebody else's temple was based off of that one?
Off of the city of Enoch's temple?
Or am I thinking of some? Am I mixing
I think you
up
might
facts?
be thinking of the Solomon's temple.
Okay. Well, then when we get to that, we'll get to that. Okay. So one thing that you pointed out in the book that I hadn't really thought about before, I mean, it's an obvious thing, but it just wasn't something I had pondered deeply about before, is that there were no temples on the earth after the great apostasy. And I just had never thought about that before. But yeah, all of the Christian religions that were on the face of the earth at that time, they didn't do temple stuff. They didn't have temples. They had big, huge cathedrals and stuff, but they didn't have temples.
Right, exactly. And like you said, this is kind of intuitive that when you think about that there wouldn't be temples, because what is a temple? A temple is God's house. And if we're going to build a house for God, we need his authority. Mm-hmm. We can't just build a house and make it God's house without his authority. Without that authority, it's just a building. And without the true gospel on the earth, any building that might have been called a temple was not actually God's house. They were just simply buildings. Many religions use the word temple to describe a place of worship. So they're really more similar to our meeting houses that we have than being in alignment with the true meaning of a temple. Mm-hmm. To members of our church, the Church of Jesus Christ, a temple is more than a building and more than just a place of worship. I was curious about what our church website said about this, and I looked it up, and it just clarified that a temple is literally the house of God, where we not only go to worship, but we perform ordinances there. And I loved this part that said, "A place where the Lord may come. It is the most holy place of any worship on the earth. Only the home can compare with the temple in sacredness." This was my favorite part right here. Whenever the Lord has had a people on the earth who will obey his word, they have been commanded to build temples. So during the apostasy, he didn't have anyone to command to build temples. There were people who were trying to follow his word, but as time went on, more and more was lost, mm-hmm. and that was lost too.
Yeah, and I mean, they were building these gaudy, grotesque cathedrals and churches they're just really so gaudy. Nothing
so
like what the original temples were like in the scriptures, nothing like what we have now. It is kind of a very clear sign, if you think about it, of like when the authority was on the earth. You can see it very clearly in the temples, which is really cool. All right, so everyone says that Utah has too many temples.
Yeah. Everyone who doesn't live in Utah.
Yeah. But that is actually not true at all. We actually don't have enough, do we?
That's right. So one of the facts in my book is that there is one temple in Utah for every 117,000 members of our church, which still sounds like a lot of temples. But we have about 2 million members of the church in Utah, which represents 12.5% of the church membership. When my book went to press, we had 17 temples in Utah and 159 completed temples, which gave us just under 11% of the temples in the world. So we had 12.5% of the membership and 11% of the temples. That's only a slight discrepancy, but for anybody who cares about fairness, we didn't have enough temples. But And I hear that a lot from people. You have too many temples. You have more than your fair share of temples. But I think it's important for people to realize that here in Utah, where we have so many temples, we have an opportunity to attend them more frequently than people who live far away. And the temples are busy all the time. My son is a freshman at BYU, and he, in typical BYU fashion, quickly had a girlfriend, and she's darling, and we love her. And she's from Washington, and she told me that the first time that she went to the temple in Utah, she was so surprised at how busy it was and how busy it is every time they go, because it's just not like that in other places where it's more spread out geographically.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the real issue, is that geographically we may have more than our fair share of temples. But numbers-wise, we don't. But we keep them busy, so that's good. But they are building some more here. Let's see, how many more are we getting? We're getting one in Tooele.
6 more announced.
We have 6 more just in Utah?
In Utah.
Do you remember where they all are? I only remember Tooele for some reason.
The important thing is that
because my mom was so excited.
Yeah. Is Tooele the same as Stansbury?
Uh-huh.
I'm not very good at geography.
Yeah, Tooele and Stansbury are out in Tooele County.
And Orem. Let's not talk about that yet, though.
Orem, okay.
I want to talk about.
Those are the only 2 we know.
There are 6.
Go look them up.
You guys look them up. That's your homework.
Yeah.
There's one more important one that I really want to talk about, though.
Okay. Go ahead.
I want to talk about the day they announced the temple in Taylorsville, Utah. Okay, so I want to talk about last October's conference when we had the women's session. And the prophet spoke at the end of the women's session, and at the very end of his talk, he did something that I had never seen done before. He told us that he was going to announce some new temples. And this was the day before my birthday, and that made it especially memorable for me. President Nelson asked us to all behave, which he's been doing lately before announcing temples, and said, if we announce a temple in a place that's special to you, please
don't whoop and holler and get crazy.
Don't yell, please react reverently. And I thought, that's fine. I always do. No problem. I'm very well behaved. So he started to list the new temples. And after a couple, he said Orem, Utah. And that was exciting to me because my sister lives in Orem, Utah, and even though she has 2 temples within 10 minutes of her house, I was still excited for her that she was going to get one in her city, because that's fun, right? And then he announced a couple more, and then he announced a temple in Bentonville, Arkansas. And when he announced that one, I actually started to cry a little bit because my other sister lives in Bentonville, Arkansas, and she drives 3 hours to the temple and makes, it's a big sacrifice for her to go to the temple. So I was so excited for her, and I just thought, this is the best night ever. And then he announced a couple more, and he got to the end of his list, and he announced a temple in Taylorsville, Utah, which most of you probably don't care about. But I was sitting in a stake center in Taylorsville, Utah, and along with every other person in that room, I gasped out loud. So there went the behaving well out the window. And then I started to cry because I live in Taylorsville, Utah, and I never, ever, ever, ever thought we would have a temple
in
Taylorsville. There was nowhere to put one. First off, there was nowhere to put a temple. We speculated for a long time about where that temple would be, and they have announced a location. But it just means so much to me. I've been going to the temple every week for the last 5 years. And the prophet gave me a temple for my birthday.
And your sisters, too.
And my sisters.
Do you just have 2 sisters?
I actually have 4 sisters.
Oh.
And the other 2 live in, I just remembered where another temple's going, Layton, Utah.
Oh, that's right.
My other 2 sisters live in Layton. So all 5 of us, are there 5 of us? Yes, all 5 of us will have a temple in our city.
That's neat. Let's see. Isn't there one? I was just thinking of one when you were saying that, but I remembered, and now I can't remember what it was, where it was.
Is
it Hurricane?
Maybe.
Is it down south?
I don't know.
Because there's only one in St. George right now, right?
Oh, you're right. They announced one in Washington County, which is,
or is it
St. George.
Oh, there's already one in Cedar City.
Yes. So there's Cedar City, St. George, and there will be a second one in St. George, but on the other.
I think well, I don't know if it's Hurricane exactly, the town.
I don't know.
Or if you're from Hurricane, you call it Hurricane. But it's near there somewhere, I think.
Yeah.
So, wow.
Yeah, we'll figure out eventually where these temples
we'll see them eventually. But my dream of going to every temple in Utah is looking harder and harder.
Right? Especially because they keep closing them.
Oh, yeah, true. I did get to go to the Salt Lake Temple for like a live session.
Oh, good.
Before they closed it.
I
was married there, but
too.
I hadn't done a session there ever before because everyone told me they're really long.
They are.
Their live sessions, they take really long.
They do.
And then I was like, but I just really want to do it. And so we went and we did it, and I think it was last year, so we barely made it.
I went last year too. I actually received my endowment in the Salt Lake Temple, so my first session was a live session. And I'm not sure if that was actually a good idea.
Yeah.
I thought, and here's what makes it even more interesting without going into anything that we shouldn't talk about, but in the live session there are temple workers who are actors. And my father-in-law was a temple worker, and he was playing one of the people. And that was just really weird for me.
Oh, that's so funny. How interesting for your first time to go through that one. It was a really neat experience, and I've heard that the one down south that they used to do the Manti,
yeah.
that they still do live sessions there
Yeah.
too, and that one I think is still open, isn't it?
I think they're closing it too.
Ugh. So if you want to do a live session, you better hurry up and get down
I think
there.
it might. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think that one's closed yet.
I don't know.
St. George is closed. My orthodontist went to the St. George Temple right before it closed. Mm-hmm. Well, my child's orthodontist. And they tried to go in to do baptisms, and they were turned away. There was a 5-hour wait.
I wonder if they're going to bring back the live session when they're done with the remodel at Salt Lake.
Yeah, I wonder that too. I think that they are.
Well, I wonder, because Salt Lake they just released an article because they had all the furniture like taped
covered.
Up. Yeah, and covered. And so you could see the rooms and the cool murals and stuff. They could turn each one of those into a room.
There's so much room in the Salt Lake Temple that you probably noticed those were rooms you had never seen before. Mm-hmm. I think one was the big meeting room that they have where they can actually hold large meetings.
Yeah. And
people more important than you and I get invited to those meetings.
Everyone is equal in the eyes of the Lord. But
that's true.
Our callings aren't all equal. But yeah, I saw that one. I was like, ooh, that's cool.
Yeah.
I can't figure out where that one is. I mean, I could kind of tell from the windows.
In the middle, like it's this huge portion.
It must be like
up. It's up. Yeah, it's up and middle-ish.
Just based off of like the windows that I could see the shape of them. Mm-hmm. I think it's up top somewhere. But I thought the celestial room was up at the top. So now I don't know where anything is.
It's a big building.
Yeah, it is. It really is. Plus, it's got all that stuff underneath.
Yeah.
Under the ground.
The tunnels.
Mm-hmm.
And
okay. Moving on. Kind of got distracted there talking about temples. Okay, so there is I don't want to say I'm like a huge Doctor Who fan because I would never like dress up like Doctor Who or anything. But I do enjoy watching it from time to time, especially the older ones. Not the really, really old ones, but there was like
from
the
2
doctors in the middle that I really liked.
1990s?
Mm-hmm.
That's when I used to watch it.
We probably like the same 2 doctors.
He had curly hair.
Oh, you go all the way back to when it was like...
I don't know. I haven't seen the current ones. My confession, I haven't made the time.
We'll just skip the first season.
Oh, good.
And you can even skip the second season.
Start
and then
on
just
3?
Start from there. Yeah.
Okay.
And then once you get to season 10, you don't need to watch anymore either.
Oh, good to know.
Anyway, we're going to get hate mail from that.
Sorry, guys.
Okay, so anyway, there is a TARDIS, which is the phone booth from or it's actually not a phone booth, it's a police box.
Right.
From Doctor Who that he flies around as his spaceship.
Yeah, super.
No, his time travel
It's
ship.
really realistic and believable, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's outside the Bountiful Temple, like across the street from it. So tell us about
So
that.
this one's a really fun one. If you guys are wondering, it is hard to write 250 fascinating facts about anything, including yourself. Just start trying to write a list that is that long and you will have trouble. It is hard. So I had to pull on every resource that I had, researching and also personal experience. And this was one from personal experience. I went to a wedding at the Bountiful Temple many years ago. And when we were leaving, just right across the street, they're very small streets, so it's very close. I saw this Doctor Who TARDIS at the edge of this property, and it had a big sign on it inviting me to get out of my car and to take pictures with it, and so I did. And when I was writing the book, I was able to get in touch with the people who built it because we had a mutual friend. And so the family that built this TARDIS are the Engelbures of Bountiful. And they just built it for fun, and they put it on their driveway, and they only planned to keep it up for a short time, but it was so popular that people begged them to keep the TARDIS, and so from that point on, they started to put it out for the entire summer.
Why did they do it in the first place?
Probably because they liked every season of Doctor Who.
Even the black and white ones?
I guess, all of it, and proposals have been made there,
Yeah. I'm going to have to take... My kids actually like Doctor Who, too. So I have, like...
okay, so this
a
next
5,
summer...
a 9, and a 14-year-old. And so I'm going to have to take them.
You'll ask me, and I'll find out if it's up. I'll ask my friend.
Okay. That's so interesting. And funny. And it's, like, literally right across the street from the temple or nearby?
Right across the street.
Oh,
so the house faces the temple.
And so that's probably how so many people have
Exactly.
discovered it that otherwise wouldn't have.
Yes.
I just went to a wedding there not too long ago, and I didn't see it, but it was February, so maybe they hadn't brought it out yet. So, interesting. Okay, now let's talk about Nauvoo. Nauvoo is a temple that has been restored. Am I thinking of the right one?
Rebuilt.
Yeah, because sometimes I get Nauvoo and Kirkland mixed up.
Yeah, it can be confusing. So the Nauvoo Temple was the second temple that the saints built. They built one in Kirtland. It was a lot smaller, more like a church in size, but really fancy for the time. But the Nauvoo Temple was big and very fancy, and they put a ton of work into building this temple. They planned to stay there. It looked pretty much exactly like the rebuilt temple looks. So for anyone who's seen it, you know what a beautiful building that was. As the saints were finishing up building the temple, the persecution that they were experiencing became bad enough that they realized that they would be leaving. And they worked really, really hard to finish this temple, even though they knew that they would have to leave. And on the day that they first started to be able to do washings and anointings in the temple, this was on December 10th of 1845. In the morning, they did the first washings and anointings. And just a little bit later that morning, a Catholic priest and his associate were allowed to come into the temple to discuss possibly buying some church property and the temple. And they ended up not deciding to buy this not to buy the temple at that time. They were also offered the option of leasing it, and the church was hoping that they would care for the building if they were leasing it, but they decided not to do that. So eventually, the saints did as much temple work as they could in the Nauvoo Temple before they had to flee, and it was not abandoned necessarily, but no longer in use. And just a few years later, in 1848, some people came and set fire to the temple, and they damaged it really badly. And after that, the church sold the temple to a group of people for about $2,000 in 1849. And the next year, there was a tornado, and it destroyed it. And it remained gone, no longer a temple for us until, I think it was 2005, I think, is when the new one, 2002, the new Nauvoo Temple was having its open house and then dedicated.
I remember when they started working on that, and they had done some excavating and had found like the cornerstones
Yeah.
and some of those sunstones, which is the face with
Yes.
the sun with the face on it, which to me looks like Joseph Smith, don't you think? Like the
Yeah,
shape of the nose.
I do. Yeah, he had
I'm
that
like,
angular
yeah, I'm
nose.
like, that's Joseph Smith's nose. Not the eyes or anything else, because it's kind of got like a chubby looking face, but
That's true. He didn't have those high cheekbones.
no. He didn't look like a
Cherub.
chubby baby, yeah. But that does look like Joseph Smith as a chubby baby with his full-grown nose. Yeah, but they found one of those, and I remember them saying that they took all the measurements from it, and the rebuilt one they completely copied from the original, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is really cool. I know they have one of them in the Smithsonian.
Oh, do they? Interesting. Yeah, it's so crazy to think that at that time where we did have some semblance of government and stuff, that there were people who were just going around like tearing down other people's buildings and setting fire to them.
And they could get away with it.
Yeah, and getting away with it. Yeah, but they must not have been taking good enough care of it for the Lord to send a tornado to come and tear down the rest of it.
Yeah, I think he wasn't pleased with what was happening with his temple.
Yeah.
One thing that I think was really interesting is that some of the temples are called temples of the restoration, and the Nauvoo Temple, so these would be temples of the early restoration of the church. The Nauvoo Temple was built, and the Kirtland Temple was built. We also had a building, it wasn't a temple, but it was called the Endowment House, that they built in Salt Lake, and they did many of the temple ordinances that we have in the temple today for many years while they were completing the Salt Lake Temple, but that was eventually destroyed. There was also the Far West Temple that they laid the cornerstones for, and temples that were dedicated or announced in Adam on Diamond and Independence. But of those temples of the restoration, the only one that we have that had to be rebuilt is the Nauvoo Temple, because the Kirtland Temple is in the hands of a splinter group of our religion. And you can rent it out and take your stake down there and meet in there for, I think, maybe $700 for 2 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
They're making money off of
They're making money off
the
of it.
LDS tour groups.
Yep.
How interesting. And then there's the, they used to be called RLDS. I don't know what they call themselves nowadays.
I don't know what they do either, but they have a temple.
Yeah, they built that one, though. It wasn't...
It looks like a seashell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They have some interesting stuff going on.
Yes, they do.
Well, isn't that who we bought? Do you know who they bought the land back from for Nauvoo?
I don't.
I thought it was the RLDS, but I must be mixing things up.
We'll have to research that.
Yeah, because I remember that. Maybe it was just that other church that had it before it got knocked down.
Right, that would make sense.
That,
I don't know what the transfer of ownership.
Yeah, I think they got a pretty good deal on it. So. Okay. Oh, and you said that every temple has a time capsule.
Yes.
And most are placed in the cornerstones, but a couple of them or one of them has one in the Angel Moroni.
Yeah, so this one's a really fun fact. One reason that it's really fun is that very few people seemed to know about it. And if you research on the internet, you'll kind of find some argument about this, but it's true. The Salt Lake Temple has a time capsule in the ball that the Angel Moroni is standing on. And
so the time capsules are typically, you said, in the cornerstone.
Yes.
Which means that they were placed early on in the construction.
Well, not necessarily early in the construction, but before it was completed. So it's in the cornerstone, but they kind of have a hollowed out part, and they place a box in there, and then they seal it up.
Oh, maybe they put like a plate or something on it too.
They do something. I mean, I don't know how the Salt Lake Temple one. I think it's stone. I think that they had a cut piece of stone, and they put it inside of a box. The original one in the cornerstone of the Salt Lake Temple, I believe, had damage, and they took it out. But the capsule in the Angel Moroni, I don't think has ever been opened, and it has some interesting things in it. To me, what's most interesting about it is just that we didn't know it was there. and we didn't notice that the ball is in two pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it's just like, kids don't notice things. You don't notice what you don't notice until you notice that you didn't notice it. Like, oh, that's always been there, and I never saw it. And this happens to I teach piano lessons, and when I teach the students a new concept, like, oh, this symbol right here means to slow down. And they say, I didn't see that. They don't even see it on the paper, written on the paper, until I point it out to them. Mm-hmm. And I think this is the same way. How many people noticed that stone ball was two pieces? Mm-hmm. Now that you know it, you can never unknow it. But it has some really cool stuff in it. It has some sheet music, which makes me happy. There's a song called the Capstone March. I would really like to hear that performed. I think we should have that at the dedication of the Taylorsville Temple. President of the church, if you're listening, I would like the Capstone March performed at the Taylorsville Temple. And another one called the Temple Anthem. And then there's some books in there, The Voice of Warning, Spencer's Letters, and Key to Theology. There's a set of the scriptures, a hymn book, and then a polished brass plate that has a lot of information about the building of the temple on it. There's a photo of the prophet and the apostles and of the temple. And then there's a document called a compendium. And I didn't really know what that was because that's not a word we use. We don't walk around saying, hey, can I borrow your compendium? So a compendium is a collection of detailed information about something. So they just put this document in there detailing all about the building of the temple.
Interesting. Compendium. So probably a compendium of maybe facts about that specific temple.
That specific temple, yeah, and the building.
Yeah, so like probably when they broke ground, when they set the first foundation stone or whatever they
And they had 40 years of history for that one, so that might be why they needed 2 time capsules.
Yeah, maybe. So there's still one in the cornerstone.
Yes.
And there's one. That makes sense because that was a huge gap between when they had done the cornerstone and when they finished it and stuck the
and that's
angel
actually
on
the
top.
capstone.
Yeah.
So it's the finishing stone.
They had just published I don't know if it was the church though, but somebody had just put out old photos of the progression of the Salt Lake City Temple. And we were looking through all of them, and it was like they would only do, it seemed like 5 to 10 feet per 5 years.
Right.
It could have been more because they were just old photos and I didn't have anything for scale. But wow, so slow.
It was.
So slow. Like you could barely see the progression between the photos. So very, very interesting. And then, and once they had the outside done, and they had to put a roof on it, then you have all the stuff inside, too.
Which they finished the inside in a year.
Oh, wow. That must have been a lot easier than all that stonework.
Yeah.
They said that they had the oxen carts from the quarry to the temple would take like 4 to 5 days.
Yes.
And they had to have like 6 oxen to move one stone.
One stone.
And it would take days, almost a week.
Isn't that crazy?
It's so crazy. And that must be why it took so long.
I think it's like raising a child.
Yeah. Oh, and it took them like 5 years just to do the wall on the outside.
Yeah. Which they're going to be tearing down.
Oh, no.
Well, they've adjusted it already, but I did read that the Temple Square will be really different in about 4 years when it's completed, and it will be more open, and they will be getting rid of a lot of that.
It's always changing.
Yeah.
It's always changing. Didn't they do a big, huge reconstruction like before the Olympics?
Yeah,
which was not that long ago.
It feels like not that long ago to us, but
yeah.
Was that 2002?
Yeah. It doesn't feel that long ago.
Just 18 years.
Yeah. But how often do you need to rebuild stuff? I don't know. The temple's been there for a long time, and they haven't rebuilt the whole temple, but...
That's true.
It seems like the new stuff is constantly being torn down and redone, like the St. George Temple.
Yes.
Yeah, that one, the only stuff they're tearing off is the new stuff that they did in, the 60s or 70s, so...
They changed their minds.
We're just not building stuff as good as we used to. That's the problem.
That's true.
Well, and apparently the additions that they put on that one they didn't match the temple as
Right.
well as I guess they would hope they would now.
I think you
So,
really see that with the Logan Temple too. The addition that they have on there just doesn't match.
Yeah. The temples I can't figure out are the old Ogden Temple before it was remodeled and the one in Provo that looks the same. That
Identical
looks
to each other.
They look like alien spaceships.
What I can't understand is how the Ogden Temple ended up looking the way it looks now and used to look like the Provo Temple. Like, to me, it looks like a completely different building.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to figure out too, is did they completely
What did they keep?
raise it to the ground?
That's what I wonder. I don't actually know.
I don't know either. I was wondering the same thing because at the time it was finished, I lived up there. And so we went through it. We went through the open house. And it's a beautiful temple. I love it. It's really, really beautiful. It's very like masculine in design inside of it. And I think it's Art Deco style inside. Art Deco. And it's just really, really beautiful. But yeah, when I was going through it too, I was like, I don't see anything left. I think they must have raised it to the ground. Maybe they just kept like the basement levels and that's it or something.
Yeah, we'll have to figure that out. That would be really interesting to know.
And I have to wonder, are they going to do it to Provo too?
I do wonder that.
Because nobody likes the way that one looks either.
It reminds me of like a wristwatch, the kind that you can take the links
band.
out of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking. Yeah, it does, huh? Yeah, it kind of looks to me like a bunch of mirrors were like glued around the top of the building.
A sugar cube temple that you glued mirrors.
When were those built? Should we look that up?
A long time ago. I'm
because they
guess
actually look
1960.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what they look like to me.
I'm just guessing though.
Well, let's look. When was the Ogden Temple built? 1972. And that's what they look to me. Like they look like tacky 70s architecture. So, I thought the Provo one was older
Provo
than
was
that.
older. I think it was built before.
Let's look at that one then.
And it has had some changes. They changed the color of the
Wasn't it gold? It used to be gold, and
now
people
it's...
called it the golden toaster. Provo was built in 1972 also.
Oh, it was. Okay.
Yeah, they were both built the same year.
Twin sisters. One of them had some plastic surgery, and the other...
Actually, in these newer pictures, since it's not gold anymore, it
looks
doesn't
better.
look... Yeah, it looks better. Okay, so it used to have gold glass behind the panels that look like a watch band. The panels weren't gold. It was like glass
Is
behind
it now
it.
clear
had
glass
like,
or frosted?
Now, it could just be the picture, like the sun isn't reflecting right. I think actually it still has the gold glass.
Huh.
It's just different times of the day. You know how office buildings can have like a sheen that looks like a mirror? That's what this has, but it's gold. So
Nothing against gold, but I'm a silver girl.
Silver, you would prefer silver windows?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's not
and
that
diamonds
bad.
And sparkly things.
But look, when the gold reflects, I mean, that's a bit much.
Oh, yeah.
That's a bit much.
I don't like that.
But then on a regular day,
it looks okay.
It looks,
I don't know.
all right.
Maybe they changed it to silver.
Or maybe it just isn't as gold as it used to be.
Gold is okay.
It kind of looks, I don't know, these newer pictures, it still looks gold to me. It's just, in some of them, it like just really reflects bright gold, depending on the light.
I know there was a change made.
Yeah, I know that too, but I can't.
But
see
it was
in
before
these
we were
pictures.
born that they built this temple.
Yeah, maybe if we look up remodeling,
Yeah,
we can get some like before. Well, now it's just bringing up the tabernacle one. I would like to know. Oh dear, look at the Ogden one.
Yeah, it's ugly.
Oh my gosh, and they're not exactly the same. I thought they weren't, but they're not. They are very similar. Wow, that one is just really gold. Just really, really gold. Wow. Okay, moving on.
This is how research was. I'd be like down the rabbit hole, and then I'd have to bring myself back.
Yeah. I still can't find like any, because when I type up remodeling, the tabernacle photos
come up instead.
Take over.
Because there's 2 Provo temples.
Right. But, and that's right. And they renamed it to the City Center Temple.
Provo City Center.
Instead of calling it the Tabernacle still. Because that would be confusing. There are these people called the Marcionites. Am I saying that right? Or close enough?
Yes, I think.
And they were around in the year 144 AD, and they also did baptisms for the dead. Tell me about that.
So, after Jesus left the earth, there was still organized religion at that time, and over time, the apostasy happened. It wasn't this instant thing. He still had apostles, and so over time the truth was lost. Well, there was a bishop in the Church of Rome, and his name was Marcion, and he had some different beliefs than the other bishops, and so they took care of him. They excommunicated him. But he had a really big following, and they called themselves Marcionites. This was a long time ago, obviously, 144 AD. We don't have a lot of records from this time, so there are not any records of what he wrote, but there are records that other people wrote about him and about his people because they didn't agree with this practice that they were doing, which was baptisms for the dead. And there was one person who wrote about him, and his name was Saint John Chrysostom, and he told the most interesting story. So there was, if somebody was studying the gospel at the time, like they were an investigator, they were called a catechumen, which is another word we don't use. We would just say investigator, but back then they were called catechumen.
Which is like not even close to how it's spelled either.
It's so weird. And so this guy, his writing, he said, when any catechumen departs among them, so somebody dies, having concealed the living man under the couch of the dead, they approach the corpse and talk with him and ask him if he wishes to receive baptism. Then, when he makes no answer, he that is concealed underneath says in his stead that of course he should wish to be baptized, and so they baptize him instead of the departed. So they had some kind of interesting practice where there'd be a dead person laid out, and someone would climb under the table or whatever, and another person would come up and say, hey, would you like to be baptized? And the person hiding under the dead person would say yes. And then they would, by proxy, baptize the living person. So as weird as that sounds, this was a practice. Several people wrote about it, and most of them were arguing that they didn't think that it was what Paul meant in his scripture about baptism for the dead. But obviously, they still had a little bit of the truth, and they were trying. They were trying to do it.
Yeah, they had come up with a very interesting way. And that could have just been, sometimes we do ritualistic type things that don't actually have any real meaning. They're just kind of like part of your culture, or
like the way you eat an Oreo.
Yeah. Also incredibly important. Okay, so you tell me your story about what's a good segue into this? Geez, the very last one.
Yeah.
So while you were writing the book about the temples, something kind of interesting happened to you that was a little bit life-changing. What happened?
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a circular story. I have to go back a few years. It's about doing my calling, and how doing my calling gave me the chance to be an author, and it also led to somebody's life being changed. And so a few years ago, I got called into the stake president's office because I was bad. Just kidding. Because I was getting a new calling, and I was called as the stake music chairman. And so I have to put together choirs for stake conference. That's one of the things I do for my calling. And the very first stake conference that was coming up, I got together with one of my friends who is a musician, and we decided we would write a song for a children's choir. And we wrote the song. It's called The Armour of God. And
which is very good, by the way.
Thank you. And so as we did this choir, I didn't think anything of it. Well, later on, when I was hoping to become an author, it was the lyrics to The Armour of God that the acquisitions editor lived in my stake. And she told me that she thought I could write because she thought I did a good job of writing that. And so I got a chance to submit a sample and was able to write my book about the temples. And as I was writing that book, I had a very intense period of time of researching for this book and just immersed in temples. I was also asked for my calling to speak in another ward. So in my stake, if you have a stake calling, you're fair game to speak with a high councilman. And I was so busy, but I never say no to church opportunities, usually never so far. And so he said, will you speak? And I just said, yes. And I had no time to write a talk. And I texted him back and I said, what's the topic? And he said, it's the temple. And I was like, perfect. I'm writing a book about the temples. This is perfect, And I said, what does the stake president want me to talk about? And he said, he wants you to prepare people for the reopening of the Jordan River Temple and get them excited and encourage them to go to the temple. And I thought, I can do that because I have such a testimony of how that can bless your life. So I started writing the talk, and I used a lot of material from the book in fascinating facts from the book, and I put them in the talk, and I wrote and I prayed and I wrote and I prayed and I wrote and I prayed, and I finished the talk, and I went and I gave the talk in this ward. And when I was done talking, a lady came up to me, and I didn't know her, and she said to me, thank you for your talk and thank you for taking away my excuses. And I just thought, you're welcome. And I said, you're welcome. I had talked about how busy we are and how hard it can be to go to the temple, and we should still go, and that I'm busy and I have 6 kids and I still find time to go because in Utah we have temples really close, and just encouraged them to decide how much they could go and to go. I didn't think about that anymore, and I went home and I went on my merry way, and fast forward quite a bit of time, almost a year later, actually just a little bit over a year later, I was sitting in state conference again, and I was up on the stand because I'd been leading the music, and I was having a little midlife crisis because I'd had this really exciting year with writing 2 books, and I had an article published, and the song that I wrote won in the church music composition, and I just was having a little chat with God and asking him, what do you want me to do with my life now? And how can I be a missionary? Because I just want to share the gospel. How am I supposed to do that? And he answered me right away. And he said, it's through your writing. No pressure, right? But I was like, okay, I can do that. I can share the gospel on my Facebook page and the things I've already been doing. And so I thought, that's neat. And the meeting ended, and I started to come down from the stand. And this lady approached me, and I recognized her as the lady who had told me, thank you for taking away my excuses. And she came up to me and she said, hi, do you remember me? And I said, yeah, I remember you. You spoke in my ward. I said, yeah, I remember. You said, thank you for taking away my excuses. It was just memorable to me. And she said, I need to tell you what happened after that. I'm like, okay. I thought she'd say, I started going to the temple more. She said, I changed my life. And I went to the temple for the first time 2 months ago. I had no idea that I was speaking to people who had never been. Mm-hmm. You don't think like that. And she said, and I kept thinking about your 6 children and how you go to the temple because you have 6 children and because you want them to know how important that is, and how you go every week for your 6 children. And I have gone 6 times every week for your children. And I have gone and done the work for my mother and my grandmother. And next year, my husband and I will be sealed in the temple. And that was just an answer to me that little things like doing our church calling and writing a book about facts that some might think, oh, it's just silly. It can lead to being an instrument in God's hands and changing somebody's life. And when people ask me, was it worth it writing a book? Yeah, it was worth it because her life is changed for the better.
Mm-hmm. Wow. She goes 6 times a week?
She went once a week for 6 weeks.
For 6 times. Okay.
Yeah. But I think she goes every week now.
Wow. And she, so when she was saying excuses, she was talking about things preventing her from even having her recommend.
Yeah, she had never gone.
Wow.
She had never gone to the temple.
Wow, that's really cool. It's amazing. Yeah, you just you're lucky that you got to see how what you've done has impacted other people. Usually we don't get
we don't usually get to, exactly. We don't usually get to, and we wonder, is it making a difference? Are these things that I'm writing making a difference? Are these things that I'm saying making a difference? Does it make a difference that I show up to my calling every week? Does it make a difference that I helped these young women stop fighting this time and that I'll do it next week and the next week? Does it make a difference? You don't usually find out. So that was really special to actually just find out,
Yeah.
And we all have those opportunities. We just don't usually find out that it really did make a difference to somebody.
Yeah, that's so cool. All right. Well, I think that is a good note to end our podcast on. We do have a little bit more to cover, but I think we're good.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So, yes, thank you so much for coming out again. And let's make sure everybody remembers your books. So we have Rebekah Pitts is her name, 250 Fascinating Facts About LDS Temples and 250 Fascinating Facts About Latter-day Saints. The other podcast about Latter-day Saints was also an incredible hoot, as my mom would say. We had so much fun with that one. It's one of our top podcasts because it's just so interesting. And that one is called "Did Brother Brigham Really Catch a Monster in Bear Lake?" So if you want to listen to that one, that's what it's called. Go find it. And if you would like to order Rebekah's books, you can go to cedarfort.com, and if you use code CF as in Cedar Fort podcast, then you can get 15% off of her books. So thank you again.
Thank you.